Okay, hi everybody. My name is Jennifer Lee, and I'm from Northumbria University in Newcastle. I'm currently a PhD student, and I'm researching the use of distributed ledger technology for construction, specifically looking at types of kind of blockchain and other ledger technologies. I'll give you a quick overview of the authors that worked with me on this paper. I'll give a quick overview of distributed ledger technology, because I'm aware that not everybody would know what that is. The proposed approach that we're looking at for integrating this into with other technologies for use in construction. I'll talk a little bit about smart contracts, and then I'll wrap up and talk about further steps. So, as I said, I'm a PhD researcher. I'm coming towards the end of my second year, and the key part of my research is to look at how this technology will integrate into construction on a general scale. So specifically looking at things across policy, process, technology, and also society, just to look at the kind of ecosystem and how this technology needs to actually be adopted across all of these different facets. Marcia is the person that actually developed the initial framework that this is based on. She actually was also part of the international task group for setting for establishing ISO standard 19650. She's now a BIM advisor at Mace, and my supervisor, who's a world leading researcher on BIM, and also Angela Cherubini, who is the person that kind of came up with the idea for the prototype that this was based on. So in terms of, just a quick show of hands, has anybody heard of distributed ledger technology? Anybody heard of Bitcoin? So distributed ledger technology, and specifically the blockchain, is what came about from Bitcoin. And a blockchain is the underlying technology, the ledger, the secure ledger that holds the information for Bitcoin transactions. So it can be public or private ledger of transactions. It stores data indefinitely and securely. And the reason it does that is because it runs across a decentralized peer-to-peer network. It's considered immutable due to the consensus protocol. So all the mathematical calculations that take place for the transactions to be validated and the chaining of the blocks mean that it's very hard to change once a transaction is added to the ledger. If it's a public ledger, such as the Bitcoin ledger, anybody can participate, anybody can see it. It's freely open, but it's very hard to change once it's uploaded. Private DLTs, you would grant permission, and therefore it's less secure, but you kind of you build a circle of trust of the people that are part of that ledger. It's transparent. It encourages disintermediation, because you don't necessarily need to pay for insurance for things if you trust the people that you're actually working with, or trust the technology. It offers low-cost transactions. It's actually cheaper than Visa, MasterCard, that kind of thing, or bank transfers. And it provides a platform for smart contracts, so I'll talk about that later on. So this is what the Bitcoin blockchain looks like, and this is just one type of distributed ledger technology. It's a linear block, and all of the blocks are chained with hashes and numbers that relate to the previous block. So if you change something previously, you will see the changes in the other blocks because they won't match up, and everybody has the same copy of the ledger on the network, and so therefore you won't actually be able to make the change without it being noticed. This is just another type, just to show you like a different type of ledger. This is IOTA's Tangle. So IOTA is the Internet of Things Alliance, and this is just a different structure. I'm not technical, I'm not going to go into that level of detail, but just to show you there are different ones, and most people, when they talk about blockchain refer to distributed ledger technology, and they're specifically referring to the one at the top. So if I want to send some money across this blockchain, I would kind of broadcast my transaction to the network to say I want to send £10, for example, or 10 Bitcoin, which is an awful lot of money these days, to somebody else. That transaction gets broadcast to the network. So everybody on that network, all of the different nodes, have to validate that my transaction is valid, that I've not already spent the money, and that transaction can go ahead. So once they've all performed their calculations, and they agree by consensus, that block is then approved and added to the blockchain, and then that transaction is complete. So this was the original framework that Marcia put into her PhD. And what we did is we worked together to actually expand that. So she focused specifically more on kind of smart contracts and how that fitted into the framework, into construction projects. But we expanded that to look at different technologies and how that would actually fit in real life. So this is conceptual at this point, and it will be going through a phase of validation later on. But it was based on a prototype that's at the University of Brescia in Italy, and it focuses on the integration of distributed ledger technology. Specifically, this one conceptualizes the blockchain with BIM, Internet of Things, and smart contracts. And as I said before, we looked at implementing ISO 19650 just to make it relevant. So we use exchange information requirements instead of employer information requirements, etc. So the first part here we've got is the agreements, and this is all of the contracts, all of the standards and regulations, all of the kind of like legal documents that would make up a project. That integrates through smart contracts, where it will collect data from the physical environment or from the digital environment, which I'll go into, and then transactions that would be established at the beginning of the project through via smart contracts will be uploaded to the ledger. So you wouldn't necessarily want every single piece of information on the ledger for a project or an asset, but there would be just decisions at the beginning as to what information you would need. But for the full picture to be realized, it would need to be machine readable. So this is something that is hopefully will drive the industry to develop on other things like kind of e-procurement and that kind of thing. So this is very conceptual, and it makes assumptions that things will develop in time, so that this system or whatever system becomes validated later on will actually function in real life. So digital environment, so this is where we have something like a BIM model or a digital twin, all the associated documents, documentation certifications, any data associated with that would be connected to the other environments. So the information from the physical environment would be collected through IoT sensors and uploaded to the information model. Any changes in standards and regulations would be fed into, again, the same digital models, digital information. And then, again, those transactions deemed relevant would be uploaded into the ledger. And again, with the physical environment, so we've got the physical IoT sensors here that connects to the digital environment and smart contracts and puts relevant transactions into the ledger. So this is the DLT environment, and we have smart contracts, which kind of run on top of the distributed ledger. Transaction processor, which is kind of the consensus protocol that actually validates and verifies the transactions, and then distributed ledger, which is the actual kind of almost like a database of transactions. So as I said earlier, we conceptualized the blockchain, and those transactions that are uploaded are determined from the outset. So the importance of all of these technologies coming together is that any construction project requires different tools at different times, but they all have different interrelations and dependencies, and they all kind of, it's not so one thing kind of relates to the other, and they all work together to deliver a project. So they all have different purposes, but they are all focused on delivering a construction project. So we'll move on now to the smart contract, which is a piece of code that self-executes once certain conditions are met. And they're very simple if-then commands. So if you think from many, many years ago, vending machines have been around, and they work on very simple formats. If you put £1 in, if it costs you £1.10, you haven't got enough money, it won't give you the drink. If you put £1.10 in, it will give you the drink. If you don't, blah, blah, blah. But having them on top of a distributed ledger with the consensus mechanisms, all the security processes and things involved, that makes it much more secure, and it makes it it changes trust. And if we transfer any kind of transaction, it doesn't have to be financial, into the ledger through smart contracts, and that creates you a very different environment in which to operate a construction project. So our paper talks about automating a installation of an external thermal installation composite system. So again, this code was taken from Marcia's PhD that we used for this paper. And what it does is, instead of, because we have a physical prototype at the University of Brescia, but it's not connected up with all of the right kind of technical elements that we need to actually bring it together. So we used random values to simulate the kind of IoT sensor data. And the installation process was developed from the manufacturer that actually supplies the panels, and Cortexa, which is an Italian organization, I think a standards organization. It's effectively a sequential process, installation process, that has a number of feedback loops if you don't meet the requirements, to give the opportunity to the workers to actually keep going back. And so if the wall is not flat, they can go back and flatten the wall, and then the sensors will retest and then progress the contract. And at the end of this, so this is a very small activity, but this is just a demonstration to show you, if you meet all the requirements, you get paid. If you don't get paid. Simple as that. So what do we see from this is that all of the different technologies complement each other within a construction project. It's not one thing that kind of needs to operate by itself. They all work together and they all will rely on each other. With smart contracts, you can automate a lot of the different activities. You can use that for performance management, but it requires things like exchange information requirements to actually be in a digital format. So here we talked about, so that requires changes in procurement practices. But again, this is not something that needs to happen just because of DLT. It needs to happen anyway. Digitalization, digital transformation in the construction industry is taking us that way. And this is making the assumption that we are leading in that direction. So of course, interoperability, lack of legislation, who will actually code the smart contracts? At the moment, we have lawyers that write contracts or take NEC contracts and adapt them to what they need. Do you need lawyers that can code, or do you need a coder that understands law? Contracts are very complex in construction, and how does that relate to the Construction Act in terms of payments, and then security around the data? A number of activities, and this is not exhaustive, but these are just to give you an idea of the kind of things that we can look at automating with smart contracts. And in terms of going forward, we're now working with ETH in Switzerland, University of Brescia, and Marcia was at Politecnico di Milano, and obviously was at Northumbria, all working together to try and think about how we take this forward. So that will be further development of the framework, and that will include validation. But we'll also actually look at creating the actual ledger, probably I think it will sit on Ethereum, and we'll work through that and actually connect it up with a physical prototype with IoT sensors and actually put it into practice and see in a lab how that works. And that's really kind of the stage that we're at. So just as a recap, we're looking at kind of integrating all these different technologies and looking at how they rely on each other and how they actually operate in a real world. So we have different elements within the framework that integrates the contracts, the standards, regulations, and then kind of feeds into the digital models, physical environment through IoT sensors, and then actually processing all of that data and storing the kind of historical record on the distributed ledger. Smart contracts and IoT, if we've seen, they have a number of uses. They will kind of come together and create this kind of ecosystem that will, I think, change quite a lot how we do things at the moment in construction. And we're looking at collaborative work going forward to kind of take the next step in actually creating that digital environment for real. And that's me. Thank you very much.